Hello and welcome to the Inventive Marketing Club, number 19. I can't believe how far we've got after the year and a half of doing these. I've managed to rack up quite a few. Hopefully you're enjoying them still. So on this particular episode, we are going to be talking about architectural photography more specifically. So looking at photography of buildings inside and out. Plus, I'm also going to be looking at 3D photography. So taking that step forward. Also joined by Jack, who I'll introduce in a minute. And really, photography is interesting. I'm not a photographer. I understand the basics of it and the principles of it and some of the key things that need to happen, but I'm not a photographer. I just don't have the eye for it. And it's always worth getting an expert to take photos for you, or at least provide advice, because it makes such a difference having the right photography to set the tone and to show your property or your product in the very best light. And it makes such a difference. And I'll give you a very good example of that with 2 Airbnb properties where you can starkly see the difference between them. But let's just tell you a little bit about me if you've recently joined. So I've worked with over 500 businesses now. In various different things. I do help them with marketing strategy, web development, video, data analysis. I'm a jack of all trades, really. I love everything to do with business, specifically marketing, and work with experts like Jack, who I'll introduce in a minute. We do this monthly webinar on a variety of different topics. And if you do need to get access to any of the previous ones, you need to make sure you're in our Basecamp Clubhouse. If you're not and you don't have access to those, do get in touch with me. Email me on support@ratherinventive.com and I'll make sure you are pointed in the right direction. Also, remember, we've got a podcast version of this video. So if you're traveling anywhere, time pressured, or you would rather watch or listen to this while walking the dog, then let me know and I'll make sure you know where that podcast is. Okay, so Jack, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background briefly so people know where you're coming from.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I mean, I've been professional for about I think about 7 years. I've been doing photography. I mean, before that, I studied photography for a degree. Since I now have a master's degree in art and design, and now I lecture. I teach photography at university level, which is great. I mean, I say I have my commercial practice, but I think primarily I like most photographers that I know consider themselves an artist and have my own practice. I recently did as artist in residence at Warsaw Art Gallery, which was absolutely fantastic experience, and doing all sorts of things with actually quite architectural. I was using architectural programs to make models and 3D renderings, creating environments. So hopefully I've got something to contribute on this. But yeah, I suppose that's the short of it.
Well, you've provided me with some examples, which we're going to use as a basis to talk around. And this is a slight departure from my normal process, which is where I have lots of slides and we rigidly talk through them. It's going to be more conversational and you sort of explaining some of these photos. And really what I want to get out of this, what I want to help people is why it's worth spending the time either to learn how to take great photography yourself, or why it's worth the value of getting someone else to do it. And also then some tips and tricks and ways to present property inside or out in the best light. So hopefully we'll go through this in some sort of order. First, just tell me from your point of view, and you're obviously going to be biased, but why is it worth spending the time on photography?
I mean, yeah, I think I am biased on the topic, but I don't see myself necessarily as evangelistic about it. But I just think it's more than just the camera. I think I think photography is something that everyone has access to, so they feel like it's something that you can just do. So a lot of people don't budget for it. But the problem is, I think the difference between a photograph and a good photograph, it's a low bar to entry, but to actually get something there's a lot of skills that are required. I mean, so there's the technical skills, which I think a lot of people focus on quite a lot, but the technical skill is kind of having, like, say, the language. It's being able to eloquently make a point, but then also you need to kind of know what point you're trying to make. How is it you're going to, what concepts are you trying to communicate, and how do you communicate concepts? There's different ways you can, little signifiers. I mean, there's a whole, photographic practice goes back, say, 150 years, but that only took over the baton from painting. And so it's hundreds and hundreds of years of kind of of norms that that go into making a photograph. And I think it's it's quite a lot to know. I think, you know, I've studied photography, I've studied art, I've studied psychology. You know, I think there's a lot of other factors which, and all those are things I feel like I use when I'm taking a photograph and are present in my decision making. So, you know, I just don't think there's a quick way of doing it. I think, and there's a big risk really. I think, I mean, at the lowest end, say if you take a photograph that's low quality, I think it reflects poorly on your business. I think it shows a lack of professionalism, which might make whoever's viewing it go, well, actually, I'm questioning their level of professionality, and should I trust in them?
And perhaps care.
Yeah.
I think people understand that not everyone can take a great photograph, but as a business owner, if they're or as a customer looking at your business, they think, well, they don't even care that much about their product, their B&B, their property, that they're going to just pop up this really dark, bad quality, low quality photo. I think that shows a lot more. And in some cases, it's better not to have that photo and let people imagine rather than having something that's bad quality.
Well, that's it. I think people will think, okay, I've got this amazing apartment. I can just take a few photographs and that will be conveyed. But it's quite amazing just to say the difference. I mean, you can make a photograph lighter or darker, and it has a different implication. It's so fine tuned, and essentially what you're giving someone, you give them a photograph, is a wealth of information, which is for the best part interpreted subconsciously. It's not like people take the time to analyze photographs. It's a very short period of time that people look at the photograph, and you're just trying to convey the message that you want very concisely and very quickly. And you've got to take that opportunity. You've got to spend that time to be able to make sure that you're making the most of that moment and conveying what it is that you want to convey.
Could you, I'm not sure if it's going to be an easy question, but what makes a good or a great photograph? Could you boil it down to some key factors?
I mean, yeah, in terms of how to make it, that's years of, practice, learning that to be able to just do it. But then I think it's essentially what you're aiming for. And a good photograph is in the reaction. It's not necessarily in technical quality. It's just a good photograph will make someone feel happy or good, or kind of it's about creating those positive associations. It's I think that's what you're aiming for, really. I mean,
that emotion.
Yeah, exactly. It's that emotional connection to something. Say if it's like you said about Airbnbs. If someone has this property, you want someone to just feel that happiness, that association of happiness when they look at it, that makes them go, well, I want to be there. I want what I've just had more so. I want the real thing. And you've got to try and create that positive response. And I think that's it. It's all in terms of what it takes to elicit that emotional response is the difficult question. But it's a very simple aim to do, but it's a difficult task.
Yeah, you're right. Years of experience go into pressing that shutter button at the right time, as well as the additional post-processing that goes on, selecting the right photograph. I mean, there's often, certainly with video editing, which I know more about, you can almost double the length of time spent taking the video as you do editing it, if not triple, because it's in the editing where you really make that final piece. I mean,
Exactly.
It makes your editing easier if you're better with the video and you take the right pieces that you need and you capture everything you need. But editing is what makes it. And I'm sure that's very similar with still photography.
Well, yeah, I think the whole process really is editing. At every point, it's editing, it's making those decisions, it's going in and going, okay, because essentially you can, in the space of a room, there's an infinite viewpoints, different positions you can take, different ways, ways that you're looking at the room, and it's editing out and selecting, okay, this is the one that is going to be best. And then when you have a series, it's taking the ones that say the most concisely give that that meaning that you want to convey. And yeah, it's this whole process of starting with infinite possibilities and just trying to whittle it down to one thing. And yeah, I think it is a very time consuming process, really. I think a lot of people focus on the fact, to take a photograph, it's fractions of a second, but the amount of prep that goes into that and to make that image, and then the prep after it, not to say preparation, the editing afterwards, the processing, it's time consuming. I think it's more than just that one moment. But you kind of want.
But that's what's important, isn't it? That's what. Yeah, but that's what demonstrates the care. And I think not only can you aim to elicit that response, so your photograph has the desired effect, but also people can see the quality and the care, and that will reflect massively, absolutely massively. I mean, just anecdotally with Airbnb, we were looking at places to go for a holiday that's coming up, and the reaction you get when you're looking at some of the people's photos, it might be a lovely place when you arrive there, because obviously when you're looking with your eye, lighting works in a slightly different way that you can compensate for poor lighting or take in more light, or whereas a photograph might look awful and it might look great there, but it will put you off going there and even experiencing that place, or not showing the amount of space, or not showing the facilities. And anyway, I'll wait until we get on to a few examples, because it just demonstrates it exactly. Let's go on to the next slide. So looking at starting with the exterior and then sort of working our way in. So take us through a couple of these photos, and just tell me when to go on to the next slide.
Okay. First one, I thought for exteriors. This is Croom Court in Worcestershire, where I worked for a while on this project. And I mean, I was there for a lot of time and trying to get the right image. I kind of had a lot of time to be able to go, okay, well, what works? It's this really impressive building. It was it's famous because it was one of, I think it was Capability Brown's first architectural work. He'd done landscapes at that point, and he did the landscape for Croom Park. So it's this beautiful building, very significant, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get good photographs from it. And I think I kind of went through that process with this, thinking, well, how do I capture the grandiosity, the beauty of it in a photograph?
Yeah.
And it was a really difficult task. And I think I mean, the reason I chose this image, I mean, I think it's quite, in some ways it's quite ordinary. To me, it's something that I haven't presented it in any way that's particularly different, but I wanted something that just had the landscape in it, and that's it. It's not enough just to see the building. You need to see the context. You need to see where it's situated, and you've got all these elements which are communicating positive things. There's a nice blue sky. I mean, you've got the water kind of shimmering in front of you. You've got details over the left, like the bridge, and you've got like, I
know, and actually the bridge is something you notice later, because you look at the placement and you don't notice it straight away. You're drawn to the house across the lake, and then you see this little detail of a bridge, and actually that's what I love. You're almost discovering things within the photo. Yeah, you can spend some time with it.
You're walking around inside the photograph. You have that opportunity to kind of explore the landscape and put yourself in it. And I think that's it. It's saying that emotional connection is that this is a place I want to be, and that's the thing you're trying to convey. Really, it's just how nice it is to be in that space, to be in its presence. And I think details like that. I mean, talking about painting as well, I think any good landscape photographer is going to be. I've done research on the roots of landscape, and I think you have this thing. I mean, Italian landscapes were the kind of tradition, the thing that people would go to Italy to learn how to learn the techniques, and they'd always paint these kind of fantastical visions of quite an unrealistic life, but they always have the same thing. They always have something called like just evidence of life. You won't just have nature, as much as, even though they're seen as these celebrations of nature, there'll always be a settlement or a house, like a smokestack, even just something to show that someone lives there, because it helps you to put yourself in the image. It helps you inhabit that landscape. And I think that's something that you always kind of have to think about. If you just have that building, you don't have necessarily a concept. I mean, I suppose the building itself is evidence of people, but something to draw you into that landscape in some small way, then you don't have the same connection with it. So I think that was important. And I think it took me a while to kind of walk around, because that's quite a difficult position to get to. And I think I was standing literally inches away from the lake to actually.
It does look like you're almost in it, yeah.
Yeah, and I very much was, but I managed to not go in. But at the same time, it's I just thought that was a nice example of just if I want to say to someone, okay, come to Croom, come to this place, that's probably the first image I'd show someone. So that's why I thought I'd start with this one.
And with the was it quite an easy photograph to take in terms of light?
No, very difficult actually, and I can kind of see the issues with it because you've got the trees on the. I mean, you can see the reflections. There's trees going all the way along the bank at the left, whereas where the cows are, the sun was directly on it. So you can see. I mean, even still, you can see that it's a little bit lighter. But I think when the original picture was taken, the difference was great. I mean, I mean, cameras kind of have a degree of latitude with light, but I think it's one of these things that we don't realize that our eyes are compensating for. So the difference in light intensity between, say, a murky day and a bright day, you're talking like, multiple times over for every. I mean, I'm not sure how many people have engaged with photography in terms of like SLRs and the mechanics of photography with aperture and shutter speed. Every time you move it up one stop, it doubles the amount of light intensity. So it's so the difference between the light on that is going to be multiples, like say exponentially greater than it is over towards the other side. So you have to edit in a kind of macro level. You've got to go into individual points when you have this wide landscape and different textures, different light levels, and them separately. So and again, it's a great source of frustration quite often as a photographer. If you want all the work you've done to not be visible in the image, because then you play badly. So, I mean, there's images that I've spent 24 hours on because they're stitching together several photographs. I mean, to get to the point where half of it is drawn, we're copying little bits and pasting it. But you want to make it look like that was just someone was there, they took a picture, and that's what came out. So, yeah, with everything, you spend a lot of time trying to make it look like you've done nothing. And yeah, that one would have been one that I did separately, painstakingly.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because you've got such bright areas and dark areas, and you're right that the eye compensates for that. You don't notice that when you're looking at something, but the camera will pick that out. So it's definitely worth that time in the edit. Now in the next photo, you go a little closer.
Yeah, I thought I'd pick something where, I mean, this is what I was talking about when you take that image a bit closer and think, okay, this is a beautiful building. This is something that should just on its own be something that kind of creates that response. But I kind of find it doesn't. If it's just a building, it's still quite cold. But with this one, I mean, there's two reasons I chose it. First, I'll start on the fact that there's the people in the foreground, and there's one of the older volunteers who they're teaching students. You can kind of see that's happening with the gestures, and I think this one worked, whereas say others I've taken from this very angle didn't so much, just because you've got those people there observing it. It's that link. You're imagining doing the same. You kind of end up taking on their journey. So I thought with that one, just the small thing of just having some people in the foreground completely changes a reading of an image. Because let's say, talk about psychology, I think people are always going to look at people first. Their eyes are always going to be drawn to people. So yeah, I think it's something that you look at them and then you kind of look up at the building. I mean, the other thing that I chose one for is the verticals. Again, it's a very I mean, I tend to see myself, whenever I talk about photography, I try to say it's not about the technique, but every photographer is a bit of a nerd and will focus on these things. So for this one, it was the verticals for me, getting the lines right. I think it's something that people don't realize. You have perspective of the camera, so sometimes there's a correction of the camera, and I think if you can make everything look straight on, again, it's the way our brains interpret things. You look, you kind of correct for perspective. So when you look up a building, even though from the perspective you're seeing it, you know that it's getting away from you in the vanishing point. You still know that it's a square or a rectangle, and you know that the lines are vertical. But I think that when you take a photograph, that suddenly doesn't become apparent. So that's something that you have to correct for, and that's one that I've done that with. So it's I mean, ideally, to take an architectural building, use a 5.4 camera. So when you have the cloak over your head, you have the the camera with the bellows. That's what, to me, on that sort of technical level, to me, that's what you should be doing every architectural photograph, but it just isn't practical anymore. So you have to go edit, sadly. But I mean, I still do take large format, but it tends to be for my own benefit.
That I was with this photo, I was immediately drawn to the people there. It gives it a sense of scale. You can see how big. I know they're standing further away from it, but you can still see how big it is, and you do see them instantly, and you're drawn up. And actually, it makes it more impressive than if they weren't there at all. And often, people are waiting for other people to get out of the way of monuments or other things like that. But actually, it's nice to see other people there, not only because you're taking a picture of the monument or the building, but because it captures that moment in time a bit more. So and maybe when you're looking back, you can see the hairstyles, what people are wearing, what people, how people are at that time, rather than just having this. And people seem infatuated about capturing just the thing, just the object. And there's even iPhone apps which will help remove that for you over a number of exposures. But I actually like having people in a picture. It gives it a reality, gives it presence, and gives it scale. And for me, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, it gives it this trace of life, particularly if you are selling a dream of something and you want people to put themselves in it. You need to show that people actually live and interact with something. This works the same for product as well. There's so many companies I've worked with where their product shots do not have any people interacting with that product at all. But yes, it's a product that people work with, and it seems, if you're selling something that people use, then you should sell it with that person in, even if you're cutting off their face a little bit, but you've just got their hands in there. But people are so important because it sort of grounds it for me anyway. Grounds an image. That's
right. Yeah, I think grounds a good term. And like you say, with having photographs, having monuments of people, and we want say something like this. This has stood for over 200 years. This building, but it just makes a more dynamic image, and it makes it a moment, and it puts you in the moment. And I think that's something, that's what it does make it far more relatable, and it makes you so, even if you don't know the person, I find, I feel like I should be putting my, loved ones or something in these pictures, but then I just love it when you've got a passerby, you've just got someone who's just walked into your life for that moment, and you've just captured that second. I can agree more. I think most images are benefited from having human presence.
Now, saying that, here's a couple of images that don't really have anyone in them at all. So talk us through these.
Okay, so this is my personal practice. As I say, it's something that I always like to have going alongside whatever commercial practice. I think if you end up doing commercial practice and just that, you're doing things for other people, and you need to be able to have that be able to kind of keep control over what you're doing, or retain ownership of your own practice. Because I mean, for anyone who's doing photography, chances are they've done it. It's because what they enjoy doing, and I think you can kind of lose it. But I mean, most of the photography I like to do tends to be architectural still, but it's presenting things in a different way. So when I talked about verticals for the other one, with this one, I tried to make a feature of it, and sometimes that's something that depending on the product, you don't necessarily want something which is just a representation. I think having that creative eye, that a different way of looking at something is quite positive. I mean, there's a photographer called Brian Griffin, who he's famously taken portraits of so many famous celebrities, but he started off by taking pictures commercially, and he did it portraits, and tend to be a businessman. But even before he had this, he became known for this artistic practice and celebrities. He was taking these really unusual pictures of people in boardrooms, just doing these kind of strange, abstract, surreal poses. And it was just a way of companies wanting to go, okay, well, we want to set ourselves apart as being something different. We're a little bit creative. We're not that stuffy, and try to subvert it. So I think sometimes having, sometimes breaking away from the norms, the way people presented, and the way photographs, standard photographs are taken, is positive. So I mean, as I say, even though this was taken in my own private kind of practice, I just thought it was something that would be worth showing. I mean, essentially, this was. This is a tower block. They have negative associations, and part of my practice is I kind of want to reassess some of these kind of 1960s post-war socialist buildings and kind of see beauty in them. And I think if you change the context of it. With this one, you remove the context of the environment, you just take the shapes and the lines of it, then it's being viewed in a different way. So it's having control over the view of, or the viewers, the impression that the viewer is going to have of the image. So that's what I tried to do with this one. I mean, it's essentially it's a reference to Russian constructivism, who constructivists wanted to use photography as a way of creating a new aesthetic for a new society after the Russian Revolution. And yeah, that's something that just always sticks in mind. I think that idea that there's aesthetics which are normalized and associated, and you can turn that on its head as a means of controlling interpretation. But if we can go into the next one, because it's another tower block picture. But with this one, I mean, it's a square image, so you might not be seeing all of it. But again, with these kind of estates, the thing that you associate is very dark images, under artificial lighting and kind of imposing. So I wanted to take some images that were, got the morning light coming across. It's something that it's using the techniques that you'd use to try and make something look beautiful, and knowing those techniques and applying them to environments or places that necessarily aren't viewed in that context. And I mean, I don't know if I'm successful or not with it, but
and why black and white with these two specifically?
I think again it's that altering of context. I think when you're taking away color, you're taking away information, and sometimes that's not positive, because it means, I mean, I think everyone thinks, oh, everything looks good in black and white, but if our appreciation is mainly about the colors, and you suddenly, when you're just going down to form, what makes it an attractive sight or interesting photograph, you kind of lose it. So, but that also means that if you take away certain information, that means you have control of the information that's left and how you can present it. So again, it's that attempt to remove it from a familiar context.
Yes. Joy comments that they look fantastic in black and white. Brilliant. It really makes the details pop out.
Thank you. And that's right. You end up focusing on sort of the structural details rather than just color, or sometimes even just placing yourself in that context. I think it's kind of it changes it from being a representation to being an image in itself. Sometimes
no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, this is for portraits, but I find that if you've got a good photographer and they're taking all the portraits at the same time, they can make them look the same and make sure the colors are balanced well. But often, if you're, as is usual, taking portraits over a long period of time, some are using a professional, some are ad hoc added after with an iPhone or other camera, then actually bringing them to black and white can normalize them a little bit more, and also remove blemishes and other things that, like redness, that people might worry about in a photo without a lot of editing. To actually change what that person looks like, you're just changing it to black and white. And it can actually not flatten everything, but it just brings a consistency and actually can look better depending on how the photographs are taken anyway. It can be sometimes a good technique just to make something that doesn't look quite as good as better. And I don't know why is that? Why do sometimes, if you've got a bad photograph, making it black and white can make it better, at least initially?
I mean, a lot of the issues when you have like matching colors. I mean, with black and white, it's grayscale. It's a single scale from light to dark. But when you've got images taken with different cameras or in different situations, then suddenly matching those colors, we're very sensitive to things not looking right. I think, like I say, that thing of spending a lot of time to make something look like you haven't done anything to it. We're so, if you put say if you merge two images, you took a person, you put them in a different background, if the lighting isn't the same, it stands out, you can tell. Whereas with black and white, it's removing that context which would place something in the situation. I think I mean, I think also there's things like, say, contrast. If you take an image and it's in bad light, it will become very flat, very desaturated. But then if you start to up the contrast, then skin tones, which again, something else that we're really, really sensitive to, is a natural skin tone. They'll start kind of getting oversaturated. People start looking a bit orange, a bit funny colored, and then you notice it. Whereas with black and white, you don't. That's not apparent. So it means that you can edit things a little bit more aggressively, extensively, to get it to match without other factors which would make the picture look unnatural creeping in. So yeah, it's definitely, if you want to make everything consistent, and consistency is something that, again, with that very anal, technically minded part of my brain, consistency is, to me, is if, because you're always working in sequences, images have to be consistent across the board. That's
yes,
the
other thing. And it does give you an opportunity, if you need to colorize things to match colors and your photos don't, making them black and white then allows you to add like a transparent color or blend with a color, so you can give some color to them without having them all look different. So I don't know, it can be used as a way to compensate for poor photography. It shouldn't necessarily. You should always try and start with the right pixels, but it can be used to help that or create style. It's I do find black and white very interesting, actually. We should move on to the interior stuff and talk about lighting there as well, which is, I think, very important on interiors.
Yeah, it's the trickiest part.
So we've got a couple of shots here. I think are they all from Kensington Palace?
Yeah, I think I took all the interiors from Kensington Palace. So with these one, I mean, again, I chose these because it's having a presence. It's having that person in there, in that interior, which is, they're interacting. Even though, I mean, they're quite deadpan. They're stood very very still, arms by their sides. At the same time, it's just a picture of a room without it. And I think it just, having someone in the context makes a difference. I mean, the other thing with the picture on the left, it's the light. I think having that person stood in front of the window, it adds that detail, the light coming across. And again, having the sight of a sunny day, it's creating that emotional response, something that it makes it look like a nice day, and somewhere you want to be. And I think so yeah, I think that's why I chose that one. So yeah, lighting could be an issue. I think the image on the right, that was all there's again, you have that window to the left, and you want to be able to use natural, I mean, you want all your images to look natural. So the best way to do that is natural light. I mean, it's more than that to make, and there's other things you can do to make an image look natural using artificial means. And sometimes images look more natural when you're using artificial means. Yeah. But yeah, ideally you want to see that light coming in.
I know with was it the recent Star Wars? They filmed a lot of it outside in the desert. So they actually often they would do like big scenes in sound stages. So they have a big green screen and they do all the stuff in there. But in this one, to get light, because they needed a lot of light, they needed desert light, and that is difficult. So the director, I can't remember his name now, but he decided to do it all out in the desert. So they set up basically a soundstage outside to get that natural light, because it's difficult to get. And so I thought that was quite amazing, really, to do that, because you have so many other problems doing things outside that you can't control for. But actually, because it was so important to get that real intensity of the light there, they just did all of the green screen, or most of the green screen work outside for certainly the desert scenes. It just shows how important that is.
That's right. I mean, sometimes you just can't fake it necessarily in the studio. I mean, yeah, with the green screen, you think, okay, well, I can control the background, but the most important thing is the light. There's just things you can't fake.
It's purely because they were shooting in that location, but they needed to do green screen in that location, and they needed it to match. So the easiest way was to do it all in that location. I thought. Well,
that's right, and that's it. When you're merging two images taken in different contexts, it's so difficult. I mean, to the point that, if you spent hours on it, if you're lucky, you might be able to get it to work. But most of the time, it just doesn't. You've got to have images. You've got to get the lighting to match, because even if people don't, they can't say, okay, well, the lighting, they'd be able to know why it doesn't work. People can see when it doesn't look right. And yeah, it is sometimes it is just worth that effort. You have to use what you need, and sometimes that's very, very difficult, but it's pointless trying to do it any other way.
No, it isn't. And looking at the image on the left, I can imagine, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, that was a bit more tricky to edit, like the cream cut outside, because you've got a huge amount of light pouring in through the windows, and then these very dark corners of the building that it's not lighting up. You can even see a little bit of that on the woman's face who's right next to the window.
Yeah.
And so your challenge is to still try and make it look as if you were there looking around it and compensating for it. But you do have this huge dynamic range between the bright light from the window and the dark corners. How do you make sure that how do you know you're getting the right shot, and that if you need to tweak it later, you can do that? What are you putting in place to do that?
I mean, I think sometimes it's just, I mean, especially when you're on location like that, you take as many as you can. I think it's making sure that something will work. I mean, there's the technical elements, but then at the same time, when you come to edit it, some things are going to edit better. You know, the image might look better in camera, might not necessarily look the best once you've edited it. So you take as many as you can. I mean, with this one, it was actually quite dark. I mean, there's I think I took I think it was around January or something. So it wasn't the brightest day, and so you have to develop strategies to get around that. And I think, you know, going back to what what makes, you know, why do you need a professional? I think, you know, cameras, they're designed to take pictures in ideal. In fact, say on your phone, everything is automated to try and pick the settings that will work best in the situation you have. But then if it's darker, then suddenly you have to get more light into the camera, and then blur is an issue, and there's nothing that they can do about that. If you're a photographer and you know, okay, what do I need to do to get more light into the situation, you'll be able to overcome difficult circumstances. And with this one, say it was a very dark day, so what we did was, it was overexposed. It was an image that would have been, the shutter would have been open for a longer period to make sure the light comes in, because I mean, those dark corners, they were dark in real life, but you have to do what you can to bring it out. I don't think I did a composite image. I mean, that's something that people do, but I think if you can, as long as you can get everything exposed correctly, as long as it's information, then you can work with it. So there would have been a lot of post-processing to bring those things out. But yeah, it's, and to be honest, that's kind of the tricky thing with interior. It's getting enough light into the camera and knowing the techniques to be able to overcome that.
And talking about that, actually, the next two shots a bit more tricky, because you've got these intensely bright light sources.
Yeah.
So how did you talk about these ones a little bit?
Well, I mean, with these ones, I think again, it's with these, whereas the other image was overexposed to be able to make sure there was light. With these ones, they were underexposed because they weren't particularly bright lights. But then it was kind of, again, quite dull lighting, because it was meant to be a recreation, I think, Queen Victoria's bedroom. So it's meant to kind of have that feeling of candlelight.
Yes.
So, but then I thought, well, it's better to lean into it. You can try and compensate for it and try and bring the light up, but then it's not going to look right. You start going to get noisy images, and it's not going to be reflective of the space. So these ones, I mean, I chose these ones because they weren't an attempt to show everything. They were focusing on details, which kind of suggested an atmosphere. It wasn't necessarily about, you know, there is a photograph I've taken, which, because it was something that was requested, was a picture of the bed. And I think it's an awful photograph, because there was nothing I could do in the situation to make it look how I want it to be. But then I thought, okay, well, if I present that alongside these kind of detail shots, where you're just focusing on just kind of the beautiful way that the light moved across, because the textured wallpaper is textured. It was yeah, kind of those patterns are raised up, so it created this really nice effect. And I thought, well, those are those details that kind of make it what it is, that give you the experience when you're there. So I focused on those. So these ones, I mean, I imagine they would have been on a tripod still, but it's yeah, making the adjustments in the camera, you know, creative adjustments essentially. I mean, I think there's quite often seen as a difference between commercial and creative practice. But I mean, again, something I say to my students all the time, there's no way that those things are completely separate. When you're taking commercial work, you've still got to have that, you've got to have that creative mind. You've got to be able to think, okay, well, what is it I'm trying to be able to imagine what it is you're trying to say, and to be able to visualize it. At the same time, with commercial, you know, if you have your own practice, that technical ability is only going to benefit you in helping you realize your ideas. So I think with this one, yeah, I chose that as a sort of a creative solution to a dark space.
So on the next shot is actually, well, let me bring it up first. It's actually a 3D render. So it's not a photograph. So talk about this one a little bit.
So yeah, again, moving on to my personal practice, it was something that during my residency, I was trying to kind of create like a utopian vision, which was placed alongside dystopian vision. You know, I wanted to
yeah, I was going to say,
yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work tends to be in some way political, and that's not to mean, you know, about party politics, just about, you know, social issues. And so I want to create an environment which took all those elements you'd see in, you know, in a catalogue. You know, I did my research by getting loads of catalogues for new developments. So we were trying to sell this dream and try to copy that, but then also kind of had some darker elements that were placed alongside it. And, you know, I made a 3D rendering. I made these buildings, I 3D printed them, and made a model. But, you know, I thought I'd choose this image because I use those same techniques that I'd use if I was coming to a commercial job. And again, it's having the light coming in, having that angle, making it seem sunny and bright, having someone who's interacting, who's there in the space that you can imagine yourself being. You know, she's facing away from the camera, so that could kind of be anyone. You know, it can be you. She's there, and it's that thing that you can put yourself in the place of. So I think again, when we're talking about, you know, painting, moving into photography, I think photography is going to influence 3D design, and people are going to make these 3D renderings that they take cues from photographs and look like photographs. So yeah, I thought I'd put that one in as just as a way of that was my attempt to make an idealized environment, at least for the person inside the building. But
well, often if people want to have a photograph or video of an environment, but it's often difficult to do that, then they might make a 3D model. And it's quite an expensive process to do that, but it might be the only way that you can get what you want. And often for films, they use, is it photogrammetry, where they'll be taking multiple photos, they'll be measuring distance with LiDAR to make up a full 3D model. And we'll come on to some of those in a minute, or at least a basic version of it, to then create a full 3D model, which is photorealistic. So they're using a combination of 3D lighting as well as real lighting, and it's quite amazing. I mean, it's the sort of thing you see in films. Anyway, we're not going to talk about that because it's not an area I know a lot about. Let's move on to staging. And I think this is quite important for a lot of people I work with, and anyone selling their property really, is about when you have an interior and exterior of the house, is to make it look great in photos by staging it as if life is just happening, and you're just at least from my point of view, it's to show how the house could be, show it at its best. If nothing else, just making sure it's neat and tidy, and so many places that don't. And let me just go through some examples, and then maybe Jack, you can comment on them. So let me do a screen share. I've got these two Airbnb examples, and you can just see from the stills I picked out a massive difference between the two. But let's look at the light and bright one. So if I share my screen, let's go to this. I think it's that one. Okay, so we're on the cowshed over in Wales. And this is just on Airbnb. I mean, but the reason I'm showing it is because when you are looking for a property to rent or to buy or let, then you are going to be drawn towards the ones that look most like what you want, and the more beautiful ones, and particularly the ones that are well lit, so you can see the detail. You can just see the property well. And I think Airbnb is such a great example of the best and the worst of these, because of the people who, and we were talking about this earlier, how much they really consider that and care about it. But this is just one example. It's not necessarily the best, but it's one I could find. And I think they've got some nice, good photos to sort of illustrate what a place looks like. And bear in mind that you'll only see the first photo, the biggest photo on the left, as part of the listing. And that's your like key chance to grab people in. So it's got to be the best. And I don't actually think that's their best shot. So we'll have a quick look through their photos. They're all nice and big. They're clear. I love the green popping out from the wood. It shows the space. It's all quite dry though. There's not a lot going on. That's a bit dark. But then we do come to some ones that are set out. They've got lighting on here. It looks a bit nicer. When we get to it, there. So they're starting to show a setup for Christmas. They've got the fire lit. Now we can start seeing some life. And I think more of their photos should be like this rather than this sort of clean, static. There, look at that. It's lovely. You can see the fire going. You think, oh, that would be lovely to go on holiday and sit in front of the fire. I think that's one of the ones I chose.
Yeah.
Which
that's the best one. I've got to say, when they came up, that one, it's inviting. It shows, there's plates at the table, there's fires on, and it's this welcoming image, and it kind of invites you to be inside of it. Whereas, say the ones that were dry, they didn't have that. They didn't have that, that evidence of, you don't want people to look like they've lived there, but you want to look like the person viewing it could. And yeah, I think that one's definitely the image that they should have led with.
Yeah, and the others are good photographs, but they just didn't have that life to it. Now let's move over to the other one. So this is what we're presented with, and it's just dark. This initial image is showing a landing, I guess. I can imagine it's actually quite nice. It looks like new furniture, newly upholstered. It looks clean. It looks tidy. But you just can't, it's not inviting because it's not, for me, bright enough. And none of the images here are bright enough, but let's have a look through. And I don't feel you should have to wade through the photos to find good ones. You should immediately know whether it's the right property to invest a bit more time to then go and look at more. I think it's all tidy. It's reasonably well staged.
Like you say, it's having that moment. It's the thing with photography. It puts the person who's taking the image and sharing it in control of the view. It's you're having that moment to be able to try and create the narrative of what this space is. And I think you are missing out on that opportunity. That's the first impression. It's like the first time you met someone. They did something awful, and that's it. That's the first impression made, and that's what it's like with photographs. You've got to make that good impression from the start. Be able to convey just. And because people do that, they make judgments very, very quickly, and then that becomes something you have to overcome. So you want to make sure that that's the right impression you've given.
I know, and actually, I think this is a nice place. It's a nice looking property. It looks nice and clean, but there's little details like this dog coming to view. Well, that's fine if the dog was meant to be there, but I don't think it was. And there's a blurred shot here, which they probably didn't realize it was blurred. But like you said, just take more photographs. Use a tripod if you can. So you don't get those blurred shots, because it probably is quite difficult. You can see the window is bringing a lot of light in, and then it's dark in one corner, and it's a shame because it looks like quite a nice property, but the photos don't show it to its best. I
think this is. I mean, when you look at, you'll know more about, say, advertising and the theory of advertising, but when you're for years and years of advertising, it's never been about describing a product and saying, or making a case in that way. It's you're trying to grab someone and give them that positive feeling, that sense that will make your life better, even if it's momentary. And I think, say with all those images, that there's a really nice big landing. It had the chair in it. If you think, and the wardrobes as well, that has a lot of wardrobe space, which is a benefit. So you can kind of see, okay, what they were thinking when they took the photographs. But it doesn't do anything to make you think, a series of closed wardrobes to go, oh, I want to be there. And I think it's descriptive rather than being that trying to control the interpretation, which I think is always the better aim to have. Yeah,
and for me, while the first example had some great technical examples of just the good photography, which is it's reasonably good, everything's clean and laid out, but there was no life there. It then started bringing in a little bit of life, which is what I call the staging element. It's not just tidying up. It's thinking, what do I want people to feel when they look at this photograph? And I'm not saying I'm the best at this, but I certainly have a reaction when I look at photographs. And I think that's where a professional can help, because they will help you understand that and help set a scene for or help you set the scene and for the emotion that you want to convey. This, I think, leads on to including people, trace of life. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this with Croom, and you were showing how having the people in front of the building really gave it some scale. It gave it interest. I've got another 2 examples from another photographer who works with another client of ours, Communion. And what I like about them is they're showing their architectural photographs, and while they have taken some sort of more standard architectural photographs, there are quite a few of them show the owners of the house. And I love this one particularly because it's a dark evening and the light is just glowing out of this gorgeous extension that they've had on their property and sort of filling up the whole of their space and almost allowing their patio to be part of the house and making that room, which isn't that big, feel a lot bigger. But what I particularly love, and you don't see it straight away, is the guy perched on the raised bed area there, looking at his property. He's gazing at it longingly, which from the architect's point of view is valuable because they want you to go, I want a property that I love like that, basically, that just looks gorgeous. You've seen that image in print, Joy. Yes, I think he's used that image a lot. I think that's one that he uses for his various different things that he's doing. There's another image which I'll knock on to the next one. So this is a bit more of a standard image. You've got this sort of overexposed window. So it's not, I think it's quite difficult because it is a very dark room, especially the back of it. But you've got this, it's a bit overexposed. But if you look at the back there, you can see one of the owners sat doing some work. And I think having that shows some element of use that you can make for that space. It's not just about a perfect photo. It's about showing how you can use that space. I've seen others where you've got, I don't know the technical term for this, but people are moving through the frame, but the shutter's been opened. So you see a bit of a blur of them. You don't really see the person clearly, but you can see someone's moving through. And I really like that as a way of showing how people move through a property or showing there is life to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a technique that I've used before because, I mean, sometimes the issue you have, if you're taking these images indoor and you want them to look like they're flooded with light, you've got to put the camera on a tripod and you've got to have a long shutter. You've got to allow more time for the light to expose the image, and which is good. But then if you want people, and you know, we agree that it's much better to have people in there if you can. What happens is people move, so you know their face becomes a little bit blurred. Everything else is perfectly still, and then there'll just be this kind of slightly, a slight bit of motion blur on the figure. And so, yeah, it's a really nice way of getting around it. If you have the shutter open for that bit longer and you have someone walking through for the duration of the image, then, you know, by leaning into it, it becomes, you can see that it's a person, but when it looks like it's trying to be a photograph and, you know, like a sharp image and not quite doing it, then it doesn't look right. So, yeah, I mean, that's a really good way of getting around the issues you have with if shooting indoor. And, you know, it looks good as well. But.
Right, moving on, because we're coming up to the hour, I just want to pop in a few things that go over and above photography, but kind of lead into the same reason for having great photography is to show off your property, whether it's a house that's you're selling or it's a property you're letting, so it's more commercial, and starting to look at different ways of using your house, so video and 3D. So I'm going to give you a quick example of something recently for a company which we're currently developing the website for. This is actually in development at the moment, so it's subject to change. But we're using the video, the walkthrough video, which we didn't make. So a previous, it was on the website previously, but actually, given time, we need to turn this around quite quickly. We've re-edited the video to sort of shorten it down a bit, because actually it wasn't a bad video. It's just 4 minutes long, which was way too long. So we brought it down to less than 60 seconds. But we've used it as a masthead image. So rather than having a slider of images, which can be a bit slow, while it is dynamic, it can be frustrating. What this does is the moment it loads the rest of the page, it starts streaming the video in, and starts showing you through the house. So it goes through the sitting room, to the dining room, to the kitchen, to a couple of the bedrooms, not all of them, because this sleeps 20, so it's massive. We don't need to show all of them. But the aim is to show the scale, the size, the quality of the place very quickly. And there is a full video if they want to see it further down. In fact, this little masthead video is only about 15 seconds. It's a very quick looping video to get your interest. Let me see if I can bring up the full one just to quickly show you, and you can have a look after it afterwards if you want. Where is it? It's Portland House here. So this should play on your screens. Forgive me if it's blaring volume out. I'll just mute it. It might help a little bit. So yeah, as I said, we didn't take the video. I think it was done from an estate agent, and they had basically a camera, perhaps it was on some sort of steady tripod, and they were just walking through the property. One of the things they did, because it's from an estate agent, is they laboured the point of going into each room and then panning around the room, and then they go to the next room, and it was technically okay, but it was boring. So we basically just crunched it together and made it a lot smaller, just to give a flavour of what's going on, so people can see the bedrooms, the garden, and so on, and do all that pretty quickly in 60 seconds, rather than, and then ending back on the property so they can see where it is. I think that's quite a nice way to give people a flavour of your property. A lot of the rules that we've talked about with photography still apply. You want to have, especially if you're moving through with a video, it's particularly important that you practice that. You make sure that not only is your property tidy, it's staged and ready to go, and you've walked through it a number of times, looking at everything, maybe even doing some test shoots to make sure and see what it looks like, not just rely on your first go, because if you do that, it's going to be wrong, or it's not going to be great. And if you've invested all that time to make it look perfect, it's a bit of a shame. It's no substitute to having great photographs. The lovely thing about photographs is you can really play with them to make sure they're perfect. Someone like Jack can just get the right angles, and you can sit with photographs longer. Video is lovely because it can tell a story quite quickly, but photographs can be something you can just look at deeply. Just like the guy who's gazing at his extension property. Actually, you start to notice a lot more details in there, spending a little bit of time with it. So they can be really useful to create that emotion and attract. But actually, video is brilliant to just demonstrate what's the practicalities of the place and the space. So that was a nice way of doing that. I don't think I've got any more of those. Let me have a quick look, see what else I had on there. And I mean, I've seen people do it with maybe an iPhone, just walking through. A lot of them have natural or optical stabilization in it, so it should be fairly smooth as long as you are, but you've got to sort of plan your route and think about it. Some people even use drones. The problem with drones, I've found, is they can give you these great aerial shots, and people do fly them through homes, but they tend to, unless you're a skilled drone operator, and I certainly am not, don't even own one, is they can tend to look a bit too automatic. They can tend to look a bit too programmed, particularly when they turn. If they're sort of moving forward and then moving to the side, they just don't feel organic and natural. And it's something that it just doesn't feel right when you're looking at drone. It doesn't look organic because it's a drone doing the video and not someone else. Let's bring back my slides again. See what's next. So we've got Portland House there. And moving on to finish, I want to talk about 3D experiences. So that's taking either photography or a virtual environment into something where you can look around it. And I've got a couple of different examples here. One of the reasons I like 3D is because it's certainly with a property, it can be user-led. So rather than the video, which is something which you design where you're walking from and to, if it's user-led, people can decide which rooms they're going to, and they can jump around and they can spend time in each room. It feels a bit more immersive, and actually it's quite fun. It's something that's quite new and different. And so at the moment, it's an experience that you can have on your website that no one else could have. First one I want to show is Matterport. And this is something I was introduced to by Ben Goff Property. I believe Camilla is online with us today. And Matterport is a software provider and a system provider for capturing and displaying 3D photography. You would need to go to a specialist to get that done. And it allows that basically to be that very thing, for that photograph to be user-led and for people to explore through that 3D environment on their own. It actually works very well for estate agents because people can look at all the detail and spend a lot of time, particularly now when you don't want to be traveling unnecessarily to see properties. Having something like this allows people to view remotely. We've also been experimenting with it for a shop. So again, for the same thing, before people can buy online, but they might want to just see what that object looks like in a room setting. And so having a Matterport 3D view of this room setting allows them to see what that looks like and move around it and get a feel for what it might look like in their room. And I'm just testing today, you can download the Matterport app on an iPhone. It's probably available for Android as well, but I didn't test that. And then you can actually make your own 3D Matterport view of your room or property in the same way using your iPhone. The quality will not be as good as a professional doing it. It just will simply not be as good. But it might be something that can move you a little way there, and you might want to look into a professional later. It's worth investigating. So let me see if I can bring up an example. Share my screen again. Okay. So this is actually on the Ben Goff Property website. And so this is an example of a Matterport 3D photograph set taken by raw photo. And what it allows you to do is just sort of move around the property. You can click on these little white spots on the floor and turn and move. You can look at the detail. You can even measure things. So I can get a measuring mode. And I want to measure from here. Let's see if we can do that. I want to measure from here to this area here. Oops, put that in. It's going to tell me how long that distance is. So that's quite good. And I think you can only do that with having a proper 3D camera to manage that for you. And yeah, you just move around the property and see everything, which is absolutely fab. It's also got this fantastic doll's house view, which I don't know how practical it is, but it looks amazing. And it just gives you, it generates a sort of 3D property, just showing you the interior. So you can just have a quick look and dive into, say, one particular aspect like this, and then look around the space. I think it's quite a nice way of looking at it. You've also got different floor plans, and you can view just different floors and just see it from that level. Yeah, really, really good. I'll let you explore that in your own time. I've got links in the slides so you can have a look at those. And I think next I want to have a look at Communion AR. So I did some experiments with Alex from Communion Architects on them using 3D rendering from their new project builds and building that into, let's get it up here, and building it into a system where they can, let me mute that, where they can show off someone's building, but do it on site. So particularly if there's a new building, they could show off that building on site, so people can walk around it. And so there's a couple of different things that Alex explains. The utility of this is that from a technical point of view, it's really useful for engineers to see clashes, to see how things work and fit together, and whether you're going to get one wall jutting into something else or waste pipe running through, because you can actually explore the property in 3D. And using augmented reality, you can actually walk around the property. So as you move forward in the 3D view, and as you move back, you move back in the 3D view. It's absolutely amazing. The other thing is just clients feeling more confident about what their property will look like. It's actually quite difficult to understand how your building is going to look in just looking at plans and sketches, but with 3D it can actually help understand a bit more about what's going on. Anyway, I'll let you, I've leave the link in the slides so you can have a look at that and listen to Alex talking about that, but it's actually quite interesting from his point of view why that's worthwhile. Let me bring my slides back. Let's see if Jack can join us for the last to finish off.
That's fantastic, actually. I mean, I've not used.
Are you there, Jack?
But they're really good. It's yeah. I mean, obviously, I look at it from the perspective of a photographer, and it's. I mean, I do videography as well, and again, like you said, it's about the difference between a photograph and a video is a photograph. If the viewer has their own leisure to be able to look at the photograph, and spend as much time as they want it on it, when the video doesn't. I mean, a video has more information, but it's still a lot of control. Say, whereas when you have that 3D environment, it's got all the information, far more than you can get in photography or videography. But you don't have that control. Like I said about when you want to be, if you want to be the one who has to control exactly what the impression someone has when they first see it, then you know, a photograph has. I mean, I get so many questions about, am I threatened by new technology whenever it comes out? So we kind of anticipate that question. I think with the 3D stuff, I think although they just have such a different way of presenting information, and there's a different way of viewing it. You know, video is very passive. You're just watching it, someone else dictating what you're seeing. But then with that, it's completely immersive. You know, it's all down to the viewer, you know, deciding what view they're taking and how they explore that environment. So it's really interesting the way that they dovetail together. And actually, I think photography, videography, and those 3D renderings, they all have their value, and they sit really nicely all alongside each other. But yeah, it's fantastic.
I do. I mean, they have different purposes. Like augmented reality is really good for sort of detailed inspection, but you probably wouldn't need that for a holiday let unless you felt it was it would appeal to your audience. But something like Matterport actually could be really useful for people to have a look around and get a sense of space to some degree. But you know, the still photographs are definitely best for you setting the opinion, for the owner setting the opinion and what they want to come across. We don't have time to go into this, but you can explore it in your own time and have a look at Apple's. Apple has a website on augmented reality. They talk a bit more about products and sort of isolated 3D objects that sit within your space, on your desk, in your garden, and so on. But there's no reason why you can't have a huge object that you can start walking inside and looking around. It works in the same way. I believe Matterport works with that same technology, but yeah, it's just interesting to explore the sort of reasons for having great photography, and then the different ways you can apply that in the same way. Right, let's finish off. So what I want you to do is think about one thing that you want to take from this going forward, whether it's how to take better photographs, whether you'll engage someone, or whether actually you'll look at what you've already got and say, how can we do this better? How can we have some fun with this? How can we can create some emotion with our photographs, whether it's a portrait or architectural photography, and think about how you can commit to using that. We don't have time for Q&A, just like every single one. I bring this slide up and we're always at the end, so we don't have time to do that. The next topic is going to be about having a blog review and content consolidation. So it's really about SEO and search engine optimization, and looking at the blog topics that work well for you and then how you can trim that down. And hopefully going to be having guest Catherine Every to talk to me about that. Do tell your friends if you thought this was fab. You've probably been to a few others. If you haven't, do check out the Clubhouse and have a look at the rest of them and let your friends know. Basically, we do this every single month. Got the entire back catalogue of 18 other videos now, and it's there's no commitment to sign up. So if you knew someone who wanted to sign up and you think they're going to benefit, they can use it for 3 months and then ditch it if they've got what they need out of it. That's totally fine. Just point them in my direction or send them over to ratherinventive.club. Thanks very much. The next session is on the 25th of August at 1 p.m. Do connect with me on LinkedIn. And Jack, thanks so much for talking us through your photographs. It's been very insightful, and thanks so much for your time.
Great. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for staying for this extended version. See you later.